The first thing I noticed about Lindenwood was the lawn sprinklers. They came on at exactly 6:45 in the evening, the same time they probably had for the last 20 years, hissing across emerald grass that nobody should have been alive to maintain. I crouched behind a hedge at the edge of the development, my rifle across my knees, and watched water arc through the dying light like nothing in the world had ended. 3 weeks since Denver fell. 2 since I'd buried my brother Caleb in a Forest Service road outside Estes Park, scraping dirt with the flat of a fire axe because the ground was too hard for the folding shovel. 1 week since I'd stopped counting the days because counting them felt like an insult to the people who couldn't anymore. And now, here, this. Hedges trimmed, mailboxes upright, a welcome banner stretched across the gated entrance reading Lindenwood Estates, a community that cares. I should have turned around. Every instinct I'd sharpened over those weeks told me to walk back into the trees and keep walking until the manicured wrongness of the place was behind me. But I hadn't eaten in 2 days, and the gas station I'd cleared that morning had given up exactly 1 can of pinto beans and a bottle of children's cough syrup. My legs were starting to do that loose thing where the knees forgot their job halfway through a step. "You planning to stare it to death, or you coming in?" The voice came from behind me, calm, almost amused. I turned with the rifle already moving, and stopped when I saw the woman standing 6 feet back, hands raised, palms out. Mid-50s, gray hair pulled into a practical bun, a hunting vest over a flannel shirt. She had a revolver on her hip, but her hand was nowhere near it. "My name's Marion Estelle," she said. "I've been watching you watch us for about 40 minutes. You move quiet. That's good. Means you've learned. But you're swaying, son. You need to sit down before you fall down." I didn't lower the rifle. "How many of you are in there?" 41, 42 if you count Mr. Pell. But he hasn't come out of his garage since March, so I usually don't." "Infected?" She tilted her head like the word was unfamiliar. Then something passed across her face, something I couldn't read. And she said, "We haven't seen one, not a single one. Not in Lindenwood, not on our roads, not in the woods behind the third hole. Whatever happened out there, it never came here." I laughed. It came out cracked and ugly. "That's not possible." "I thought the same thing for the first month," Marion said. "Now I just thank God and tend the tomatoes. Come on. There's stew on and a bed in the Hendersons' guest room. They went to visit their daughter in February and never made it back, so the room's vacant. We've been keeping it ready for somebody who might need it." I should have asked more questions. I should have asked why a community sat untouched while cities burned. Why no helicopters had ever found this place. Why nobody inside seemed to be trying to leave. I should have asked what they wanted in exchange for stew and a bed. Instead, I lowered the rifle, because my arms were shaking, and because Marion Estelle had the gentle, terrible competence of a woman who had buried a husband long before any of this started and learned how to keep walking afterward. I recognized that walk. Caleb used to call it the funeral gait. "My name's Aaron," I said. "Aaron Voss. I'm not staying long, just one night." "Of course," Marion said, and smiled in a way that did not entirely reach her eyes. "Just one night. That's what they all say at first." She turned and walked through the gate. I followed her, and the sprinklers kept hissing. And somewhere deeper in the development, a child was laughing. And that, more than anything, was the sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The Hendersons' guest room had a quilt on the bed, stitched with little blue geese, and a framed cross-stitch above the dresser that read, "Bless this home." There was a glass of water on the nightstand, condensation beading on the rim, like someone had set it there 10 minutes ago. I drank it without thinking, and then stood holding the empty glass, suddenly aware that I had just consumed something prepared by a stranger in a place I did not understand. Marian knocked once and pushed the door open before I could answer. She carried a folded stack of clothes, clean jeans, a flannel, socks still in their plastic banding. "Mr. Henderson was about your size," she said. "He won't mind. Bathroom's down the hall. The water heater works. The pressure's better in the morning." "The water heater works." I said it back to her flatly. "Solar, the whole development. Phil Garrity put it in back in 19 because his wife wanted to be off the grid. Turns out she had the right idea." Marian set the clothes on the bed. "Dinner's at 7:30. The Whitlocks host on Wednesdays. You don't have to come down, but it would be polite." "Polite," I repeated. She looked at me then, really looked, the way my mother used to look when she suspected I was hiding a fever. "Aaron, I know what you're thinking. I thought it too. You're waiting for the catch. You're cataloging exits. You're trying to figure out which one of us is going to come at you in the dark. I'm telling you to eat the stew and sleep in the bed and decide tomorrow. The world has been a vice for a long time. It's allowed to loosen for one evening." She closed the door behind her. I stood in the middle of the room for a long time before I moved. The shower was the first hot water I'd felt since the days in Cheyenne. And I leaned my forehead against the tile and cried in a way I hadn't allowed myself to since Caleb. Ugly, hitching sobs that I muffled into the crook of my elbow. When I came out, I put on Mr. Henderson's flannel and his jeans and his socks, and looked at myself in the mirror over the dresser. A dead man's clothes on a man who should already be dead. Lindenwood, apparently, was full of these little arithmetic problems. Downstairs, the Whitlocks' dining room smelled like rosemary and butter. 12 people sat around a long table that looked like it had been pieced together from 2 smaller ones. They were drinking wine. There were candles. A teenage girl with a violin case beside her chair was arguing with a man I assumed was her father about whether she had to practice scales after dinner. Conversation paused when I came in. Then a heavy-set man at the head of the table stood up and crossed to me with both hands extended. And I had a strange, disoriented flash that I was meeting my future father-in-law at an engagement party. "Aaron, isn't it? Dale Whitlock," Marian told us. "You've had a hell of a time. Sit, sit. Lila, scoot down a chair. Let's give him room. Are you a wine drinker, Aaron? We've got a decent red and a passable white. The cellar's not bottomless, but it's not yet at the bottom either." I sat. Someone put a bowl of beef stew in front of me. Actual beef. I hadn't seen beef since the second week. I picked up the spoon, and my hand was shaking so badly the broth slopped over the rim. And the girl with the violin, Lila, I gathered, quietly reached over and steadied the bowl with her fingertips, not looking at me, sparing me the embarrassment of being seen. That small mercy was what undid me. I ate, and they talked around me, and nobody asked me anything I couldn't answer. And the candles guttered, and outside the sprinkler shut off at 7:53 with a final long hiss. And for the first time in 3 weeks, I did not feel like prey. That, I would learn later, was the most dangerous thing they did to me. I slept 11 hours. I woke because sunlight was coming through curtains I'd forgotten to close. And for a moment, in the soft, warm confusion of waking, I thought I was in my apartment in Boulder, and Caleb was about to call to complain about his roommate. Then I remembered. And the remembering was worse than the original grief had been. Because grief at least had been new, and this was just the daily relearning of it. I went downstairs. Marian was in the kitchen drinking coffee, actual coffee. She slid a mug across the counter without asking. "There's a town meeting at 10, she said. "Community center. You don't have to come. But Dale wanted me to mention it." "What's it about?" "You mostly." She said it without any cruelty. "We have a process. When someone new arrives, it's not a trial. It's not anything bad. Just a conversation. Everyone gets to ask their questions. You get to ask yours. And then we vote on whether you'd like to stay longer than the one night you mentioned. And if you vote no, then we give you a backpack of supplies and walk you to the gate." Marianne sipped her coffee. "Nobody's ever voted no, Aaron. But the option exists. It matters that the option exists. Do you understand?" I said I did. I wasn't sure I did. I drank the coffee. Lindenwood by daylight was somehow more disorienting than Lindenwood by dusk. 63 houses, Marion told me, arranged in a loose horseshoe around a small artificial pond. A community garden where the tennis court used to be. Solar panels glinting on every roof. A man in his 70s was mowing a lawn 3 doors down. Push mower, the kind that doesn't need gasoline, and he waved at us as we passed. A black Labrador trotted out from behind a hedge and pressed its head against my hand, and I almost wept again, because I'd been petting a dog without thinking, and the simplicity of that was overwhelming. "That's Banjo," Marion said. "He belonged to the Yee family. They didn't make it back from Salt Lake. He stays with Pastor Rule now." "How many didn't make it back?" Marianne stopped walking. She seemed to consider her answer. 23 that we know of. From the original residents. Lindenwood had 86 people when this started. We lost the ones who were traveling, mostly. A few who insisted on driving out to look for relatives in the first week. After that, nobody left. Nobody left? There hasn't been a reason to. I let that sit between us. The lawnmower man waved again. Somewhere a wind chime was tinkling. I thought of the highway I'd walked in on, the abandoned cars with their doors hanging open, the smell from inside the Walgreens and Lions that had made me throw up against the side of the building. "Marion," I said, "how is this possible? Really, how?" She started walking again. "I have a theory. Pastor Rule has a different theory. Dale thinks it's geography. We're in a kind of valley, off the main roads. The development was never on any map that mattered. The infected, whatever they are, they need a path. They follow movement, sound, scent. We don't generate any of that on a scale they can detect. We're a quiet pocket, that's all." "That's all," I echoed. "That's all. And the grace of God if you ask Pastor Rule. And dumb luck if you ask me. Most days I'm with Pastor Rule." We reached the community center. It was a converted clubhouse with a peaked roof and stained glass insets in the doors. Through the windows, I could see people setting up folding chairs. A woman was carrying a tray of muffins. A child, the laughing child from yesterday, I assumed was running between adults' legs with a paper airplane. I stopped at the foot of the steps. Marion waited. "Marion, if I asked you right now to walk me to the gate and let me leave, would you?" She turned. There was the look again, the one I hadn't been able to read at the hedge yesterday. Now, in daylight, I could read part of it. It was pity. "Yes," she said. "Of course. But Aaron, please come to the meeting first. Please. Just hear them out." I went up the steps. The community center smelled like coffee and floor wax and something faintly sweet I couldn't identify. Vanilla, maybe, or the residue of decades of potlucks. 41 people sat in folding chairs arranged in a half circle, leaving the open side for me. There was a chair waiting in the center of it. Not a witness stand exactly, but close enough that my throat tightened. Dale Whitlock stood at a small podium to the side. He'd traded last night's sweater for a button-down, and he had a yellow legal pad in front of him with what looked like handwritten notes. The whole arrangement had the careful theater of a homeowners association meeting, which I suppose, technically, is what it was. "Aaron, thank you for joining us," Dale said. "I want to start by saying, on behalf of everyone here, that we're glad you're alive." That sounds like a small thing to say. It isn't. The fact of your continued breathing is, statistically, a kind of miracle, and we honor it. A murmur of agreement. The teenage girl, Lila, was sitting in the back row beside a woman who had to be her mother. She gave me a small, embarrassed wave. I tried to wave back and my hand wouldn't quite cooperate. "We're going to ask you some questions," Dale continued. "They will sound strange. Some of them will sound rude. I apologize in advance. They are questions we ask everyone who finds us, because we've found that the answers tell us more about what's happening out there than any radio broadcast we've been able to pick up. Is that all right?" "Yes," I said. My voice came out smaller than I wanted. "Where did you start from?" "Boulder, North Boulder." "When did you leave?" "Day 6, after the National Guard pulled out of the university." Dale wrote something down. So did 3 other people I hadn't noticed had notebooks. I felt, suddenly, that I was being catalogued. Not unkindly, the way a librarian catalogues a rare book. "What was your route?" I told them. "Boulder to Lyons on foot, Lyons to Estes Park in a stolen Subaru that died outside Allen's Park, Estes Park to a Forest Service road where I'd buried my brother, the Forest Service road to here, mostly on foot, with 2 nights in an abandoned ranger station, and 1 night in the loft of a barn that I'd not been alone in, but had pretended to be." I left some things out. I think they could tell. "Did you encounter survivors?" "Yes." "How many?" 31, total, that I spoke to. There were more I saw and didn't approach. "Did any of them tell you about a place like this?" I almost laughed. "No. Nobody told me about a place like this. Nobody believes in a place like this." Dale nodded, as if I'd confirmed something he already suspected. He looked at his legal pad. "Aaron, did you ever, at any point in your travels, see something that didn't match what you expected? Something that made you question what you thought was happening?" I opened my mouth and closed it again. The question was too big or too specific. I couldn't tell which. I thought about the woman who had been standing on her porch holding a casserole dish, as if waiting for a guest who would never arrive. I thought about the dog tied to a mailbox in Pinewood Springs, fed and watered, with a note pinned to its collar reading, "His name is Custer. He is a good boy, please." I thought about the silence on the AM band between Estes and here. A silence that was not static, but the absence of static. As if the broadcasting infrastructure itself had decided to stop participating. "I saw a lot of things that didn't match," I said carefully. "I'm not sure which one you mean." Dale glanced at Marion. Marion gave a tiny nod. "Aaron," Dale said, "have you ever seen one? An infected, up close, within 10 feet?" The room went very still, the kind of stillness where you can hear the wall clock. "Yes," I said. "Several." "What did they look like?" I stared at him. "What do you mean, what did they look like?" "Please, describe them, in detail." And I realized, with a slow, cold dread that started at the base of my spine and climbed, that this was the actual question. Everything before it had been preamble. They were not asking me to confirm my route. They were not asking me to confirm my losses. They were asking me to confirm that the infected existed at all. I described them. I described the man at the gas station in Lyon, whose jaw had unhinged in a way jaws are not supposed to, and the way his eyes had not tracked light. I described the woman in the Subaru I had stolen, who had been buckled into the passenger seat and who I had not realized was infected until she turned her head 90 degrees toward me, with the dry click of cartilage rearranging itself. I described the 3 teenagers in the parking lot of the King Soopers and Lions who had moved as a unit, the way starlings move, the way I had never seen humans move before. I described the smell, which was the part everyone always wanted to know about and which I could never quite explain. The wrongness underneath the rot, the chemical note like a battery left in a drawer too long. I talked for maybe 10 minutes. Nobody interrupted. Nobody took notes anymore. They just listened, and a few of them, Lila, the woman beside her who I now understood was named Patricia. An older man near the door with a hearing aid had the still careful faces of people watching a film they could not look away from. When I finished, Dale set down his pen. He looked, I thought, very tired. "Thank you, Aaron. I know that wasn't easy. Why did you ask me that?" He didn't answer immediately. He looked at Marion again. Marion was looking at her hands. It was Pastor Rule who spoke. He was a small, wiry man in his 60s, with a clerical collar under a cardigan, and he had been so still in his chair I had nearly forgotten he was there. "Aaron," he said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it carefully before you answer. Have you considered the possibility that what you saw was not what you believe you saw?" "What?" "There are conditions," Pastor Rule said, "that can produce vivid hallucinations, severe dehydration, sleep deprivation, grief, psychological trauma of the kind you have plainly endured. The mind, under sufficient pressure, becomes a kind of theater. It will produce, for its own protection, narratives that explain the inexplicable. You think I imagined them?" "I think," Pastor Rule said gently, "that the world ended for you in a way that was so terrible, your mind constructed a reason, a villain, something to fight, something other than the simple, unbearable truth that the people you loved died, and that the systems we depended on failed, and that there is no enemy to blame." I looked around the room. 41 faces looking back at me with the same gentle, patient pity Marion had shown me on the steps. Not one of them looked alarmed at what I had described. Not one of them looked frightened. They looked sad. They looked sad for me. "You're telling me," I said slowly, "that you don't believe in the infected." "We're telling you," Dale said, "that we have seen no evidence of them. We have had 4 other survivors arrive at Lindenwood since this began. Each of them described things very similar to what you described. Each of them, after a period of rest and care and good food and quiet, came to understand that what they had experienced was a kind of fugue, a trauma response. Each of them is among us now, healthy and well. That's not possible. It is possible. It is, in fact, what we have observed." "There were bodies," I said. My voice was climbing. "There were bodies in the streets. There were cars on fire. There was a National Guard checkpoint at—" "Aaron," Marion's voice, soft, "there has been a collapse. We know there has been a collapse. Power grids, communication, food distribution. We know people have died. We are not denying that there has been catastrophe. We are only telling you that the catastrophe you are describing a disease that animates the dead, that turns people into predators, that we have not seen. And we have looked. We have driven out as far as the county line. We have hiked the ridge. There is suffering out there. There is no monster." "You drove to the county line." 3 times. The last was in April. And you didn't see. We saw abandoned cars. We saw houses that had been looted. We saw, twice, human remains. We saw nothing that walked when it should not have walked. The room was waiting for me to absorb this, to accept the gift they were offering me, which was an explanation in which I was not a haunted survivor, but simply a traumatized one, in which the rules of the old world still applied, in which my brother had died of something ordinary like dehydration or untreated infection, and not because a thing that had once been a man had bit him through the calf in a Conoco parking lot in Estes Park. I stood up. The folding chair fell over behind me. "I need air," I said, and walked out. I made it to the artificial pond before my legs gave. I sat on a wrought iron bench that someone had painted green to match the cattails, and I put my head between my knees, and I tried to breathe the way Caleb had taught me to breathe when I was 12 and used to have panic attacks before swim meets. In through the nose, out through the mouth, count of 4, count of 6. Caleb had been good at things like that. Caleb had been good at most things. After a while, I became aware of someone sitting beside me. I didn't look up, and they mean well, you know. Lila, the girl with the violin. She sounded younger than she had at dinner, 15 maybe, 16 at the most. It freaks people out the first time. Pastor Rule did it to me too, when my mom and I got here. I lifted my head. "When did you get here?" "February. We came from Fort Collins." "And what did you see between Fort Collins and here?" She was looking out at the pond. A few mallards were paddling near the reeds. After a long moment, she said, "I saw my dad turn, in our kitchen. He'd been bit on the wrist by a guy at the Sam's Club. He told us it was just a regular bite, that the guy was crazy, that he'd be fine. He wasn't fine. He came up the stairs around 4 in the morning, and my mom shot him with the gun he kept in the closet, and we drove south, and we ended up here." "And what do they say about that? Marion and Dale and Pastor Rule?" "They say my dad had rabies." Her voice was flat. "They say it's been a bad year for rabies, because animal control collapsed. They say my mom did what she had to do, but that the thing she shot was a sick man, not a monster. And that I shouldn't tell the story the way I just told it to you because it scares the others." I looked at her. Really looked. She was thin in the way teenagers are thin, all elbows and collarbones, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that had loosened over the course of the morning. She was looking at the ducks with the expression of somebody much older. "Lila," I said, "do you believe them?" She didn't answer for a long time. Then she said, "I believe that my mother needs to believe them. I believe that if I stop believing them, she will fall apart. And I have already watched her fall apart once this year, and I'm not strong enough to watch it again. That's not the same as believing them." "No," she said, "it isn't." We sat with that. A breeze moved across the pond. Somewhere behind us, a screen door slammed, and a woman called for somebody named Theo to come in for lunch. "Lila, has anyone here ever tried to leave? Since the start, I mean really tried. Not a drive to the county line. Mr. Yee tried. In the second week. He wanted to find his sister in Salt Lake. He took the silver pickup that used to be Phil Garrity's." She paused. "He came back 4 days later. He said he hadn't been able to get past Grand Junction. He said the roads were too bad." "Did you talk to him?" "He stopped talking to people pretty soon after. He stays in his garage now." "Mr. Yee is Mr. Pell," I said slowly. "The one Marion didn't count." Lila looked at me. There was something in her eyes I hadn't seen yet in anyone at Lindenwood. It was the look of a person who had been waiting for a long time for somebody to ask the right question. "His name is Henry Yee," she said. Marion calls him Mr. Pell, because the garage he stays in belongs to a different family, the Pells, who didn't make it back from Phoenix. Marion does that. She renames things. She thinks if you change what something is called, you change what it is. Have you ever talked to Henry Yee? Once, in March, I was out walking and I heard him crying through the garage door. I knocked. He let me in. He had taped newspaper over all the windows. He had a shotgun across his lap and a Bible open on the workbench, and he hadn't slept in I don't know how long. He looked at me and he said, her voice caught. She steadied it. He said, they don't want to know. They've decided not to know. And if you decide not to know, you can't ever go back to knowing. And then he asked me to leave. And I did. And I haven't gone back. I stared at her. The breeze had picked up. The mallards had drifted into the reeds and disappeared. Lila, where's Henry Yee's garage? She looked at me for a long moment. Then she stood up and brushed grass off the back of her jeans. I have violin practice at 1, she said. If somebody happened to be walking past 14 Sycamore Court around 3 this afternoon, they might find that the side door isn't locked. People around here aren't very careful about locking things. There's no reason to be. She walked away. I stayed on the bench for a long time, watching the place in the reeds where the ducks had vanished. I spent the next 4 hours behaving like a man who had decided to stay. I shook Dale Whitlock's hand and said I would like to think about a longer visit. I let Marion show me the community garden and admired her tomatoes, which were, in fact, admirable. I ate a sandwich made by a woman named Bev, who had lost both her sons in March, and who hugged me afterward without asking. I sat on the front porch of the Hendersons' house with a glass of iced tea and watched a man across the street paint his mailbox. The whole time I was thinking about Henry Yee. At 2:45, I told Marion I was going to take a walk to clear my head. She nodded and did not offer to come with me, and I understood that I was being trusted, and I understood that the trust was itself a kind of fence. They didn't need to watch me. They had set the conditions in which I would watch myself. Sycamore Court was at the back of the development, where the houses gave way to a thin strip of pine trees and the chain link of the perimeter fence. Number 14 was a 2-story colonial with a detached garage at the end of a long driveway. The garage windows had, indeed, been papered over from the inside. I could see the yellowed edges of newsprint pressed against the glass. I walked past once, hands in my pockets, the way a man on a leisurely stroll might walk past a garage. Nobody was on the street. Nobody was visible in any window. I went around the block. I came back. I went up the driveway as if it were the most natural thing in the world, because the most suspicious thing I could do was hesitate. The side door wasn't locked. I went in fast and closed it behind me, and the smell hit me before my eyes adjusted. Not the smell of the infected. I knew that smell. This was different. This was the smell of a man who had not bathed in a long time, and who was eating canned food, and who had been doing both inside a sealed concrete box for months. Underneath it was something else, gun oil, and the dry, papery smell of old books. "Don't move." A voice from the dark. "Just stop where you are." I stopped. My eyes were adjusting. I could see the shape of him now, seated on a stool against the far wall, the long line of a shotgun across his thighs. The barrel wasn't quite pointed at me. It wasn't quite pointed away. "My name is Aaron Voss," I said quietly. "I came in last night. Lila told me where to find you." A long silence. Then, "Lila Whitcomb." "I don't know her last name." "Whitcomb, Patricia's daughter." He didn't move. What did she tell you? She told me you said they had decided not to know. Another silence. Longer this time. I could hear him breathing. Then he stood up, slowly, the shotgun lowered to point at the floor. He crossed the garage to a workbench under the papered window and clicked on a small battery-powered lamp. Henry Yee was 40, maybe 45. He had been a substantial man once, I could tell from the loose way his clothes hung on him now. His beard had grown in patchy, and his eyes were the eyes of a man who had stopped sleeping for a reason. The Bible Lila had mentioned was on the workbench, open, with handwritten notes in the margins in 2 colors of ink. "Sit down," he said. He gestured at an overturned milk crate. "If you're going to be here, sit down. Standing makes me nervous." I sat. He stayed standing, the shotgun cradled now, not aimed. "Mr. Yee." "Henry." "Henry, what's happening here? What's wrong with this place?" He looked at me for a long time. Then he set the shotgun down on the workbench very carefully, and he sat on the stool across from me and put his face in his hands. When he looked up again, his eyes were wet. "I drove to Grand Junction in March," he said. "I told them I couldn't get past it. That was a lie. I got to Grand Junction. I got through Grand Junction. I drove to Salt Lake City. I found my sister's apartment building. There was nobody in it. There was nobody in any building. I drove back. I went all the way to Lindenwood. And the whole time, every mile, I saw what you saw. The cars, the bodies, the things that were not people anymore, but had been people. I saw them, Aaron. I'm telling you, I saw them." "Then why?" "Because when I got back," Henry said, "and I told them I told Dale, I told Marion, I told Pastor Rule, they sat me down in that community center, and they explained to me, gently, kindly, with infinite patience, that I had had a psychotic break. That my grief over my sister had produced a fugue state. That the things I described were impossible. And then they told me that if I continued to insist on the truth of what I had seen, they would have no choice but to consider me a danger to the community. A danger. A destabilizing influence. That was Pastor Rule's phrase. He used it 3 times. They told me that other people here were holding on by their fingernails. That my insistence on what I called reality was a kind of violence against them. That the kindest thing I could do, the truly loving thing, the truly Christian thing, was to accept that I had been ill, and to apologize to the community, and to take my place again. And if you didn't?" Henry looked at the shotgun on the workbench. "They didn't say. They didn't have to say. There are 40 of them, Aaron, and one of me. And the gate is locked from the inside, but it is also, functionally, locked from the outside, if 40 people decide it is. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" I understood. I understood completely. I felt the understanding settle into me like cold water filling a basement. "Why are you still here?" I asked. "Why didn't you leave again?" He laughed. It was an awful sound. "Where would I go, Aaron? Salt Lake is empty. Denver is on fire. My sister is dead. My wife and son were in Phoenix, and I have no reason to believe Phoenix is any different from anywhere else. I came back here because here was the only place I knew. And then I made the mistake of telling the truth, and now..." He gestured at the papered windows. "Now I'm the cautionary tale. They bring people to look at my garage from the outside, and they say that is what happens when you refuse to heal." I sat on the milk crate for a long time without speaking. Henry didn't push me. He seemed in some terrible way relieved to have an audience, as if he had been rehearsing the speech for months and was finally able to deliver it. "Henry," I said at last, How are they protected? Really? If everything you're saying is true, and everything I saw between Boulder and here is true, how is Lindenwood still standing? He looked at me. There was something in his face I couldn't name. That, he said, is the question I've been trying to answer for 4 months. And I think, Aaron, I think I have an answer. I think I have most of an answer. And I think it is the reason they want me to be crazy. Tell me. He stood up and crossed to a footlocker against the wall. He unlocked it with a key from a chain around his neck and lifted the lid. Inside were notebooks. 6, maybe 7 of them. The cheap composition kind with the marbled covers. He took out the top one and brought it back to the workbench and opened it under the lamp. It was a map, hand-drawn, in pencil. To a scale he had worked out from a road atlas. Lindenwood was at the center. Around it he had drawn concentric rings, and inside the rings he had marked locations with small symbols: X's, circles, triangles, stars. Every day, he said, for the first month after I came back, I walked the perimeter. I went out through the back fence. The back fence has a gap behind the Garrity place that nobody talks about. I walked. I went as far as I could and came back before dark. I mapped. I counted. I documented. Documented what? He tapped one of the X's. This is the old Conoco station off Highway 7. The one you would have passed on your way in, about 3 miles north. Did you stop there? No, I went around it. I saw movement inside. Good. Movement, yes. There are at least 11 inside that station. I have watched them. They do not leave. They are. And I want you to listen to me very carefully now, Aaron, because this is the part that sounds insane. They are arranged. Arranged. Positioned. Distributed. There are 11 at the Conoco. There are 7 at the old feed store at the Mile 14 junction. There are between 20 and 30 in the church at the crossroads. I have not been able to get close enough to count exactly. And the pattern, Aaron, the pattern of where they form a ring. Around Lindenwood, at a radius of approximately 3 to 4 miles. They do not move inward. They do not move outward. They are placed. I stared at him. Placed by what? I don't know. I have theories. None of them are good theories. But Aaron, listen to me. They are holding a line. And the line is around us. And the inside of the line, Lindenwood, is empty of them. Not because we are lucky, and not because we are blessed, but because something is keeping them out. Or keeping us in, I said. He looked at me. The lamp guttered. For a long moment neither of us spoke. Then he nodded, very slowly, as if I had said the thing he had not been able to bring himself to say out loud. Or keeping us in, he repeated. I felt the floor shift under me. Not literally, the metaphorical floor. The understanding that had been forming since Marion stepped out of the trees behind me yesterday rearranged itself into a new shape. And the new shape was much worse than the old shape. Henry, has anyone in Lindenwood ever been bitten, even once? A scratch, a nick? No. In 4 months. In 4 months. That's not luck. No, it isn't. What do the others say when you've tried to tell them this, about the ring? He laughed again, the same awful sound. I haven't told them about the ring. I told them about the things I saw on the road. They wouldn't even accept that. If I told them about the ring, they would do more than call me a destabilizing influence. They would do, I don't know what they would do, but it would be more. I thought about Marion's face at the gate, the pity in it, the way she had said nobody's ever voted no. I thought about Dale's careful preamble. We honor your continued breathing. I thought about Pastor Rule's gentle patient catalog of trauma responses and the way the room had been arranged so that I was the only person facing outward. "Henry," I said, "I think they know." "I know they know," he said. "That's why I'm in this garage." "No, I don't mean Dale and Marion and Pastor Rule know about the ring. I mean, I think they made the ring, or somebody in Lindenwood made it. Or somebody in Lindenwood is in contact with whatever made it. The ring exists because Lindenwood exists, and Lindenwood is being preserved. And there is a price." Henry's face went very still. He hadn't, I realized, taken it that far. He had been sitting in his garage for 4 months with half a thought. And I had just walked in and finished it for him. And the finishing of it was the worst thing he had ever heard. "What price?" he whispered. I didn't know, not yet. But sitting there in the gun-oil dark of Henry Yee's garage, with the rings of his hand-drawn map spread out under a battery lamp, I thought about the 4 other survivors Dale had mentioned, each healthy and well, each among us now. I thought about how easy it would be to count the people in Lindenwood, and how hard it would be to know if the count had ever changed. I left Henry's garage at 4:30. He gave me one of his notebooks, not the one with the map, a different one, a record of names and dates that he made me promise to read in private and to burn if anyone saw it. I tucked it inside the waistband of Mr. Henderson's jeans and pulled the flannel down over it. We did not say goodbye. He turned off the lamp and sat back down on his stool in the dark, and I closed the side door behind me and walked out into the late afternoon sunlight, as if I'd been doing nothing more than admiring the architecture. Marion was waiting on the corner of Sycamore, not pretending to be doing anything else, just waiting, hands clasped in front of her. "You took a long walk," she said. "I had a lot to think about." "Did you find what you were looking for, Aaron?" She knew. Of course she knew. I don't know whether she had watched me go in, or whether Lila had been less discreet than I'd hoped, or whether the simple fact of my absence had been enough. There were 41 people in Lindenwood and very few places to be, and an unaccounted-for hour would have rippled through the community like a stone dropped in the pond. "I found Henry Yee," I said. There was no point lying about it. "He let me in. We talked." She nodded, slowly. She didn't seem angry. She didn't even seem disappointed. She seemed, more than anything, sad. "Henry has had a very hard year," she said. "I hope you'll be gentle in your thinking about what he told you. He carries a great deal of pain." He showed me his maps, Marion. I'm sure he did. You know about the maps. I know Henry walks the perimeter. I know he counts things. I know he writes things down. I have, on more than one occasion, retrieved his notebooks from places he has dropped them and returned them to his door without opening them. I respect his process, Aaron, even when I don't share his conclusions. "So you know about the ring." She looked at me. The afternoon light was angling across her face, and I could see, for the first time, how tired she was. Not the tired of one bad night. The tired of a person who had been holding something at arm's length for a very long time. "I know what Henry calls the ring," she said carefully. "I know there are infected, somewhere, at some distance, in numbers I cannot verify. I know our perimeter has held. I know I'm grateful for it every morning I wake up." She paused. "I know I do not look too closely at gifts." "That's not the same as not knowing, Marion." "No," she said. "It isn't. But it is what I can manage. Do you understand the difference? It is what I can manage, Aaron. I have buried a husband and a son and most of the world I knew. I have led these people through 4 months. They were not equipped to survive. I have done it by deciding, every morning, which questions I will permit myself to ask and which I will not. That is not weakness. That is the only strategy I have. We stood on the corner. Somewhere a lawnmower was starting up the old man with the push mower, going for round 2. A child shrieked with laughter, the same laughing child I had heard the first night. Marion, who built the ring? I don't know. Marion, I don't know, Aaron. Her voice cracked just for a syllable. She recovered. I have a guess. I have a guess that I do not say out loud because saying it out loud would mean making a decision, and I'm not ready to make that decision yet. And I may never be ready. What's the guess? She looked at me. The pity was back in her face, but underneath it now was something else. The look of a person who was about to choose to trust me, and who knew that the trust would cost both of us. Phil Garrity, she said quietly, did not just install the solar panels. Phil Garrity was a research scientist at the National Institutes of Health before he retired in 2017. His specialty was, very specifically, animal behavior modification via biochemical agents. Phil Garrity has a basement that none of us have been inside in 4 months. Phil Garrity's wife Eleanor disappeared in the 2nd week, and Phil told us she had gone to find her sister in Phoenix. Eleanor's car has never moved from the garage. I have checked. She drew a breath. Phil Garrity loves this community, Aaron. He loves us very much. And I think he is doing something in his basement that I do not want to know about. Because if I knew, I would have to decide. And if I had to decide, I think I would decide wrong, in one direction or the other. And either way, people I love would die. The lawnmower hummed. The child laughed. Marianne Estill stood on the corner of Sycamore Court and told me the truth she had not told anyone. And I understood, with a terrible clarity, that she was telling me because she'd already decided I was going to do something about it. She was offloading. She was making me the one who had to decide. Marion, I said, where does Phil Garrity live? She pointed without looking. The house at the end of the cul-de-sac, the largest one, the one with the most solar panels, the one where the lawn was the greenest of all the green lawns in Lindenwood. Dinner is at 7, she said. At the Whitlocks again. Please come, Aaron, please. Whatever you decide to do, please come to dinner first. She walked away. I stood on the corner of Sycamore until my shadow stretched long across the asphalt, and the sprinklers began, again, their precise, indifferent hiss. I went to dinner. I went because Marion had asked me to, and because not going would have been an announcement, and because I needed time to read Henry's notebook, which I did in the locked bathroom of the Hendersons' guest suite with the shower running for cover. The notebook was a census. That was the simplest way to describe it. Henry had recorded every person who had arrived at Lindenwood since the start of the collapse. Not the original residents, the arrivals. There were 9 names, not 4, as Dale had told me. 9. Beside each name was a date of arrival, and in 5 cases, a date and a small notation. Departed. That was all. Departed, March 4th. Departed, March 19th. Departed, April 11th. Departed, May 2nd. Departed, May 28th. 5 people had arrived at Lindenwood and then, according to Henry, departed. Dale had told me that morning that 4 other survivors had arrived and were now healthy and well among the community. 4, not 9. 4 who had stayed. The other 5 had departed. Departed where? In what direction? With what supplies? Without a car, because the cars in Lindenwood didn't move. On foot then, out through the gate, through the ring, into the country of the infected, 5 times. With what understanding of what waited for them? Or, and this was the thought that made me have to sit down on the closed toilet lid with my hand pressed against my mouth, 5 times, not departed at all, 5 times something else. I thought about Phil Garrity's basement. I thought about animal behavior modification via biochemical agents. I thought about a ring of infected positioned at 3 to 4 miles around a community that had, by some grace, never been touched. I thought about what such a ring would require, in the way of maintenance, in the way of resupply. I put Henry's notebook back inside my waistband and went to dinner. It was a smaller group this time, 8 of us. Dale and his wife Anne, Marion, Pastor Rule, a couple I hadn't met named the Castellanos, and Phil Garrity himself, at the foot of the table, smiling at me as I came in like an uncle who had been looking forward to my visit for weeks. Phil was 68, maybe 70. Tall, white-haired, with the loose, easy posture of a man who had been the smartest person in most rooms he had ever entered and had stopped finding it interesting. He wore a cardigan. He drank his wine from a glass that he held by the bowl rather than the stem, which was a small wrong note in an otherwise impeccable performance. "Aaron," he said when I sat down, "Marion has told me about you. I'm sorry it's taken me a day to make your acquaintance. I keep odd hours." "Marion tells me you put in the solar?" "A long time ago, before any of this. My wife wanted us to be self-sufficient." He smiled. "Eleanor was always ahead of her time." "Where is Eleanor?" A small pause, not long enough to be a flinch, but it was there. "Phoenix. She went to be with her sister at the start. We haven't been able to reach each other for some time." "That must be hard." "It is what it is, Aaron." He sipped his wine. "I've made my peace. We all make our peace in our different ways. That's the work of this season, isn't it?" The conversation moved on. Ann Whitlock served a chicken in some kind of cream sauce, and I ate it without tasting it. Pastor Rule told a story about a hike he had taken up the ridge the previous week. Dale told a joke that wasn't quite a joke. The Castellanos, who had been at Lindenwood only since January, talked about the small frustrations of trying to make sourdough at altitude. It was a perfectly normal dinner party, except that the man at the foot of the table had, I was now certain, a basement full of something he was using to control the perimeter of the world I had walked in from. And every other person at the table either knew it or had decided not to know it. And somewhere in Phoenix, a woman named Eleanor, who had never gone to Phoenix, was waiting to be remembered. Phil's eyes met mine over the candles. He held the look longer than was comfortable, and then he smiled, very slightly, and raised his glass. He knew. Of course he knew. Marion had told me about him because Marion had reached the end of what she could carry. And Phil had let her tell me because Phil wanted me to know. Because Phil had been waiting, perhaps for months, for the right person to walk in through the gate. I think, and I have thought about this a lot in the time since, that Phil Garrity was lonely. Not for company, for a witness, for somebody who would understand what he had done and the cost of it and the necessity, as he saw it, of doing it. Marion knew without understanding. Dale suspected without admitting. Pastor Rule had built a theology around not knowing. Phil had no one to talk to about the actual work. After dinner, in the foyer, while I was putting on my borrowed jacket, he came and stood beside me with his hands in his cardigan pockets. "Aaron, I'd be glad if you'd come by for coffee tomorrow morning, just the 2 of us. There's something I'd like to show you, something I think you've earned the right to see, given what you've come through." "What time?" 9. The house at the end of Sycamore. The green door. I'll be there? Good. He patted my shoulder. His hand was warm and dry. Good, Aaron, I'm glad. He went back into the dining room. Marianne was watching me from the doorway. She did not look relieved. She looked like a woman who had handed someone a loaded weapon and was about to find out how good her aim had been when she chose them. I walked back to the Hendersons, through the dark. The sprinklers had finished. The development was silent except for the low hum of the solar inverters on every roof. A sound I had not consciously registered until that moment. A sound that was, I realized, the constant background note of Lindenwood. The breathing of the machine that kept this place alive. I did not go to Phil Garrity's at 9. I went at 6. I had not slept. I had lain on the quilt with the blue geese and stared at the ceiling and worked through it. And I wait for time. I concluded with the cold clarity that visits you in the third hour of a sleepless night that I would not survive a meeting on Phil Garrity's terms. He had invited me into his home. He had set a time. He had, almost certainly, made preparations. Whatever he intended to show me, he intended to show me in a way that placed me, at the end of the showing, in whatever category he had placed the 5 departed. So I went at 6. The sky was the bruised purple of just before dawn. The sprinklers were not yet on. Nobody in Lindenwood, as far as I could see, was awake. The house at the end of Sycamore had a green door, as Phil had said. The door was locked, which I had expected. I went around to the back. There was a sliding glass door onto a patio. It was unlocked, because Lindenwood did not lock things, because there was no reason to lock things. I slid it open and stepped into Phil Garrity's kitchen and closed it behind me. The kitchen was immaculate. A coffee pot was set up but not yet brewing. A single mug was on the counter. He had, I realized, intended to make me coffee. He had been looking forward to it. The basement door was off the hallway, between the laundry and a powder room. It was locked, but the lock was a simple interior knob lock that I jimmied with the blade of my pocket knife in under a minute. A skill Caleb had taught me when we were teenagers and used to break into our own house when we forgot our keys. The door opened onto a flight of carpeted stairs leading down into a thin yellow light. I went down. I will try to describe what I saw without indulgence. There is a temptation in the recounting of horror to dwell. I am going to resist it because what was in Phil Garrity's basement deserves to be reported and not performed. The basement was finished. Drywall, recessed lighting, climate control. The light I had seen from the top of the stairs came from a single low-wattage bulb in a hallway that ran the length of the house. The hallway had 3 doors off of it. The first, on the left, opened into what had been, in another life, a home office desk, computer, filing cabinets, a corkboard. The corkboard was the key. The corkboard had a map of the area around Lindenwood, pinned with small red flags at locations that matched, almost exactly, the locations Henry Yee had marked on his hand-drawn maps. Beside the map, taped to the wall, was a chart. The chart had columns. The leftmost column was a list of dates. The next column was a list of what I'm going to call dosages, because that is what they were. The third column was a list of what Phil had labeled behaviors observed. The fourth column was a count. I am not going to transcribe the chart. I read enough of it to understand. Phil Garrity had developed or refined or applied a compound. The compound did not cure the infected. The compound did not kill them. The compound, in the doses Phil had recorded, modified their behavior specifically, their territoriality. The infected within range of his delivery system would not move past a certain line. They would defend that line against other infected. They would, in a manner Phil had described in his notes as resource guarding, hold their position. The line was the ring. The delivery system was, in part, what was behind the second door. I will not describe the second door. I will say only that there was a person behind it, and that the person was not Eleanor Garrity, although Eleanor Garrity was in there too. In a sense, in a state I am not going to articulate. The person behind the second door was alive, in the sense that the infected are alive, and was restrained. And was I understood this only later, when I had time to put the pieces together being used as the production source. Phil had figured out how to harvest the agent. The infected themselves produced it, in the right conditions, under the right stress. Phil had built a system. The system required input. The input was the missing 5. The third door, I did not open. I went back up the stairs. I did not run. Running would have made noise. I closed the basement door behind me and relocked it, because I did not want Phil to know, yet, what I had seen. I went out through the sliding glass door. I crossed the patio. I went around the side of the house and through Phil Garrity's perfect lawn and out onto Sycamore Court at 6:41 in the morning, 3 minutes before the sprinklers came on for their dawn cycle. And I walked, not too fast, back to the Hendersons' guest room, and I sat on the edge of the bed, and I shook for a very long time. I had until 9. That was when Phil expected me. I had 2.5 hours to decide what kind of man I was going to be. And I had not had 2.5 hours of uninterrupted thought since the 3rd week of the collapse. And I used every minute of it. The arithmetic was ugly in every direction. If I told the community what I had seen, some of them would not believe me. Some would. The ones who believed me would split immediately into factions. Those who would want to stop Phil and dismantle the system, and those who would want to protect Phil and the system because the system was the only reason any of them was alive. The factions would not negotiate. There was no time for the factions to negotiate. Phil, the moment he understood I had been in his basement, would act. Phil had means. Phil had a basement full of means. If I told no one and walked out the gate at 9, I would walk into a ring of infected that had been engineered to hold a perimeter. The agent that kept them oriented inward was, as far as I could tell from his chart, not foolproof. There had been spikes. There had been incidents Phil had labeled breaches. The ring was holding because Phil was tending it. The ring was, in essence, a fence made of teeth. And the fence had gaps. And the gaps were what had eaten the 5. If I stayed and said nothing, I would, by every breath I took inside the gate, become complicit in whatever the 3rd door was for. There would be a 6th departed, eventually a 7th. The community would continue to be saved at the cost of strangers who walked in tired and grateful. And I would be one of the people who let them sit at dinner, not knowing what they were eating into. I went to Henry Yee's garage. I knocked. He let me in. I told him everything, fast, with the door closed and the lamp on the workbench. He sat on his stool with a shotgun across his knees and listened without interrupting, and when I was finished, he put his face in his hands for a long time. "What do you want to do?" he said finally, without looking up. "I want to burn it down." The basement. The basement. The 3rd door. The system. All of it. I want to do it before 9, before he can act. And I want to take Lila and her mother and you and Marion, if Marion will come, and I want to walk out the south gate, not the front. The south gate behind the Garrity place that you told me about. The one in the gap behind the back fence. And I want to do it before the ring collapses, because once the agent stops being administered, the ring is going to come inward. Henry, it is going to come inward, and it is going to come fast. And the people who stay are going to die. They are going to die anyway. Some of them, yes. But the ones who can be saved have to be told. They have to be given the choice. Pastor Rule has to be given the choice. Dale and Ann, the Castellanos, the old man with the lawnmower, the laughing child. Every person who didn't know has to be given the choice. And the ones who did know. I thought about that. I thought about Marion. I thought about Marion telling me about Phil because she had reached the end of what she could carry and had set the carrying down in front of me. The ones who did know, I said, have to be given the same choice, but not by me, by each other. I'm not the judge here, Henry. I'm just the one with the matches. Henry lifted his face from his hands. There were tears on it, but his eyes were clear. There's gasoline in the Pell garage, he said. The Pells kept 3 cans for the generator. I checked 2 months ago. I don't know why I checked. I think I knew I was going to need it. Then let's go. He stood up. He picked up the shotgun. He took from the footlocker the rest of his notebooks and put them in a canvas bag. He looked around the garage that had been his prison and his sanctuary and his pulpit for 4 months, and he said very quietly, "Thank you, Aaron." For what? For coming in the side door. We walked out into the morning together. The sprinklers were hissing. The laughing child was somewhere laughing. We had 2 hours and 17 minutes before Phil Garrity would set out a coffee mug for a guest who was not coming. We woke Marion first. She was already awake. She opened her door before Henry could knock and looked at the 2 of us standing on her porch, with a canvas bag and the shotgun and the cans of gasoline we had moved, by then, into the bed of the silver pickup that had once been Phil's and that had been sitting unused since Henry had brought it back from Salt Lake. "You went in," she said. "I went in. Tell me one thing. Eleanor isn't in Phoenix." Marion closed her eyes. She kept them closed for a long time. When she opened them again, she said, "Give me 10 minutes. I need to dress, and I need to write 3 letters. Marion, there isn't 10 minutes, Aaron. I have led these people for 4 months. I owe them 10 minutes. We gave her 10. Henry waited at the truck. I went to wake Lila. Patricia Whitcomb opened the door in a robe with her hair flat on one side and her hand already on the kitchen knife she kept in the pocket of the robe, which told me a great deal about Patricia Whitcomb, all of which I respected. I said 3 sentences. She listened. She turned without a word and went upstairs to wake her daughter. And 4 minutes later, they came down both dressed and both carrying backpacks they had, I understood, kept packed since February. "Where?" Patricia said. "Southgate, behind the Garrity place. We're going to make a great deal of noise first. You should be at the gate before the noise starts." Understood. Lila looked at me. She did not say anything. She did not have to. She picked up her violin case in her left hand and her backpack in her right, and she followed her mother out the door. And as they walked down the path, she turned once and gave me the smallest nod. And I thought, she's going to be all right. Whatever happens after this, she is going to be all right. Because she was already the most awake person in this development before I ever walked into it. By 7:15, we were at Phil Garrity's house. Marion had her letters in an envelope on the Whitlock's porch and a revolver on her hip and a pair of walking boots that looked like they had been waiting in her closet for years. Henry had the gasoline. I had a box of long matches from the Hendersons' kitchen drawer and Mr. Henderson's rifle, and a clarity I had not felt since the day I crossed the Boulder City line. Phil's sliding glass door was still unlocked. We went in the way I had gone in, down the stairs, through the office, past the corkboard, past the chart. I made Henry and Marion wait in the office. I did not want them to see the second door. I went alone, and I did what needed to be done at the second door, which was not violence and not mercy, but a third thing that lives between them, and that I am not going to describe. Then I poured gasoline, on the chart, on the corkboard, down the hallway, across the threshold of the second door, across the threshold of the third door, which I still did not open. We backed up the stairs. At the top, I lit a match. The whole thing went up with a soft, almost domestic whoomp, the way a gas oven does when the pilot catches. We closed the basement door behind us. We left the house. Outside, on Sycamore Court, the sprinklers were hissing. "Now the noise," Henry said. I had been thinking about the noise, about the form it should take, about what would wake the right people and not just trigger the wrong ones. In the end, what I did was, I went to the community center and I rang the bell. There was a bell, a real one, on a frame outside the front doors, the kind they used to ring for fires before there were phones. I had noticed it on my first walk through with Marion. I had asked her what it was for. She had said, "We've never had a reason to ring it." I rang it now. I rang it for 2 full minutes. The clanging bounced off the houses and the pond and the careful manicured lawns of Lindenwood Estates. And one by one, the porch lights came on. And one by one, the doors opened. And one by one, the residents of a community that had chosen, for 4 months, not to know, came out into the morning to see what they were finally being told. Marion stood on the steps of the community center. I gave her the bell rope and she gave me a long look, and then she turned to face her neighbors, who were gathering in their bathrobes and their slippers on the dewy lawn. And she spoke. I will not transcribe what she said. It was not a speech for me. It was a speech for them. It lasted maybe 4 minutes. It contained the truth about Phil Garrity, and the truth about the 5 departed, and the truth about Eleanor, and the truth about what was now burning in the basement at the end of Sycamore Court, and the truth about the ring, and the truth that the ring would begin to fail within hours, and the truth that anybody who wanted to come with us to the South Gate was welcome, and anybody who wanted to stay was free to stay, and that she, Marianne Estill, was going, and she was going because she had been a coward for 4 months, and she did not intend to be one for a 5th. When she was done, 22 people went home to pack. 11 stood where they were and would not meet her eyes. Pastor Rule sat down on the lawn and put his hands on his knees and stared at the grass. Phil Garrity, I learned later, came out of his front door at 7:31. Saw the smoke rising from his own roof, and went back inside. He did not come out again. We left through the South Gate at 8:40, 24 of us in the end. Marion, Henry, Patricia, and Lila. The Castellanos, who had argued in whispers for 15 minutes on their porch, and then come out with 2 suitcases and a face of resignation. The old man with the push mower, whose name was Earl, and who brought a backpack and a hatchet and nothing else. Bev, who had hugged me without asking. Dale Whitlock, without Anne, because Anne would not come. And the look on Dale's face, when he walked out the gate without her, is something I will carry for the rest of whatever life I have. A handful of others. Pastor Rule did not come. He stayed on the lawn. The last I saw of him, he was standing up, slowly, and walking toward the burning house at the end of Sycamore Court. And I do not know what he intended to do when he got there, and I'm not going to speculate. We took the silver pickup and 2 other vehicles that the families had kept maintained. We took what food we could carry. We took water. We took Marion's revolver and Henry's shotgun and Mr. Henderson's rifle and a hunting bow that Earl produced from somewhere with the unembarrassed dignity of a man who had been waiting his entire life to be useful in exactly this way. The ring did not collapse immediately. It collapsed in stages. We made it 11 miles south before we heard the first sounds behind us, distant, like wind, like a crowd at a stadium 2 valleys over, and Henry, driving the lead truck, accelerated without comment. And nobody in the bed of the truck spoke, and Lila played, very softly, the opening of a piece I did not recognize on her violin, holding it under her chin in the swaying bed of a pickup on a dirt road in the foothills of the Front Range. And I have thought since that it was the bravest thing I saw any human being do in a year that contained no shortage of brave things. We made it to a Forest Service station I had passed on my way in, the same one I had spent a night in 3 weeks earlier. We took shelter. We took stock. We counted ourselves twice, and the number did not change, which felt at the time like a small miracle, and which I now understand was simply the result of having made our decisions early enough to outrun the consequences. In the days after, we moved south and west. We found other survivors. We were absorbed, eventually, into a larger group that had organized around an old summer camp near Salida, a place that had no Phil Garrity and no ring and no clean lawns, only a chain-link fence and a watch rotation and an honest accounting of what it was costing every day to stay alive. Marion became, in that camp, what she had been in Lindenwood, except that she let herself ask the questions now. Henry began to sleep again. Lila, who is 17 as I write this, teaches the younger children to read in the mornings and plays her violin in the evenings. And I do not believe I've ever met a person who deserves more straightforwardly to live. I have thought a great deal about Lindenwood. I have thought about whether what we did was right, about whether Phil Garrity was a monster or a man who had become one, by degrees in the service of people he loved, about whether Pastor Rule was a coward or a shepherd or both, about whether Marion's 4 months of not knowing were a failure or a kind of survival. I am in no position to judge. I do not have answers. I have, instead, a single conviction, which I offer not as wisdom, but as a thing I now know about myself, that there is a price for being kept safe by something you have chosen not to look at, and the price is not paid by you. It is paid by strangers. It is paid by the next person who walks in tired through the gate. It is paid in a basement you will never enter, by a person whose name you will never learn, in a currency you will spend the rest of your life pretending you did not authorize. I walked in through that gate once. I will not walk in through another one. I am writing this in the loft of a barn outside Salida. It is November. The first snow has come and gone and come again. Lila is downstairs teaching a 6-year-old named Tomas the difference between B and D. Marion is in the kitchen of the main house, arguing with Henry about the rationing of coffee, an argument they have every Sunday, and that I have come to understand is a form of love. I dream about Lindenwood. Not often, sometimes. In the dreams, the sprinklers are always on, and the lawns are always green, and Marion is always standing in the doorway of the community center about to say something I cannot quite hear. I wake up and I'm grateful and I'm ashamed. And I've learned that those two feelings can live in the same chest without canceling each other out. My brother Caleb has been dead for almost 6 months. I do not, anymore, try to bargain with that fact. I carry him with me. I carry the 5 departed too, whose names I read in Henry's notebook and whose faces I will never know. I carry Eleanor Garrity. I carry the laughing child, whose name I never learned, who I hope is alive somewhere and who I suspect is not. The world did not end. It only narrowed. What is left of it is small and cold and honest and mine.